NASA finds evidence of 10 new Earth-sized planets in our corner of the galaxy. The more we look, the more we find planets as small as ours. NASA has found new evidence of 219 planets outside our solar system. 10 of those exoplanets appear to be similar to the size of the Earth and orbit their stars in the habitable zone. How about that? Just far enough away to develop water, but not so far that they freeze. Well, see, my whole argument that we had to have come from a brown or red dwarf is the very fact that we have atmosphere. Because I don't think a stone going around the sun in the habitable zone would have anything to do with whether it had atmosphere or water. The moon pretty much proves that. It's been going around the sun for almost as long, if not as long as the Earth. It still doesn't have an atmosphere. That had to come about from some kind of an umbilical cord or connection, for lack of a better word, if you know what I mean. Or a natural process. It wouldn't just start happening on a dead planet spontaneously. The potential discoveries are part of the final catalog of results being released from the first Kepler Space Telescope mission. Kepler has been surveying the Cygnus constellation since 2009. During that time, scientists have found more than 5,000 potential exoplanets in an area of the sky about 3,000 light years away from Earth. Today's announcement whittled those candidates down to 4,034. A total of 2,335 of those have been verified as exoplanets, 21 of which are Earth-sized and orbit in their star's habitable zone. Earth-sized planets are of particular interest because they can teach us about how our own planet formed, and because there's a small chance they could harbor life. Like I said, I don't think there's too many main sequence stars that just develop planets without some kind of an umbilical cord.
That's why
I think it's the red or brown dwarf, or both. The potential discoveries are part of the final catalog of results being released from the first Kepler. Kepler spots planets by looking for dips in the brightness of the stars they orbit. It must be pretty damn sensitive to be able to distinguish a dip, known as a transit. When the scientists see this happen, they then study each signal to confirm that it's coming from a planet passing in front of the star, and not some other anomaly that they've created.
Yeah, shut up.
If it is a planet, the Kepler data can be used to determine its mass, size, and orbital period, or how long it takes to go around the star. New Kepler planet candidates. To get these newly refined results, the team moved away from identifying each signal by hand, an inconsistent method, according to Susan Thompson, a Kepler research scientist for the SETI Institute. You'd walk in and you go, looks like a transit. Looks like a transit. Looks like a variable star. You know what I mean? It was like junk, variable star, planet. It would be like that. We stopped doing it that way, she said during a NASA podcast interview. So to fix this, the Kepler team simulated their own positive and false signals of planet transit and compared them to the actual data from the mission. This allowed the team to figure out where they might have overcounted or undercounted a particular type of planet. I mean, you gotta get it dead eye. The result is that this final catalog should be the most accurate ever released by the Kepler team, of course. NASA is getting better at identifying Earth-sized exoplanets in other ways, too. The team spent 5 years working with the operators of the ground-based Keck telescope in Hawaii to study 1,300 stars that hosted planets of these sizes. From that effort, they were able to surmise that Benjamin Fulton, the lead author of this study, called a major new division in the family tree of exoplanets. During a press conference about the news, he compared the identification of these new planet classes to the discovery that mammals and lizards are separate branches on the tree of life. The division now is between two categories: super-Earths or rocky planets, about 1.5 times the size of our own, and mini Neptunes, glassy planets, more than 2.5 times Earth's size. Well, that's good news for the exploding planet hypothesis. That means Earth is going to be allowed to get a lot bigger if you have 2.5 times bigger. Their terms were already used, but were sometimes considered interchangeable. It's an important distinction to make because Neptune-sized planets are almost always inhospitable to life as we know it. Our result sharpens up the dividing line, but if they are so big, then they're not favorable for life, Fulton says. Our result sharpens up the dividing line. I see. Over like what size does life stop appearing on a planet? That's interesting. Let's see. Planetary. Oh, they still believe in the accretion fantasy. Better knowledge of how to find planets like our own will help scientists sift through this final catalog of data from Kepler's original mission. It will also allow scientists to write better lists of promising targets that more powerful telescopes can study in the future. With the final catalog of planetary candidates from Kepler's original mission released, I'd like to see that. I'm going to search for that. I'd like to check out some of the systems, maybe talk about them. NASA will now focus on the K2 mission, which began in 2014, which has found over 100 different exoplanets so far. Exoplanets are interesting, especially in other solar systems. Was started as a way to give. It will also allow scientists to write better lists of promising targets the more powerful telescopes can study in the future. The final catalog, planetary candidates from Kepler's original mission released, NASA will now focus on the K2 mission, which began in 2014. K2, which has found over 100 different exoplanets so far, started as a way to give the telescope a second life after Kepler suffered multiple mission-threatening technological setbacks. Two of the telescope's 4 reaction wheels failed, one in 2012 and one in 2013, and at least 3 are needed to properly aim the telescope. Luckily, team scientists devised a clever workaround by using the sun's pressure on the telescope solar panels as a stand-in for the broken wheel. How that worked out. Kepler can still hunt for planets, but photons from the sun don't generate as much force as a reaction wheel can. The limits of the K2 mission mean scientists have to go about their searches more methodically. It's akin to picking up leaves in your yard one by one instead of raking them all into a bag. The telescope will continue on with K2 until it runs out of fuel, likely sometime in 2018. Oh, so it's probably already out there just floating around dead now, I guess. This is the first I heard of it. When asked during the press conference how the team felt about Kepler's first mission coming to a close, Thompson explained that she sees it more as a new beginning. It's always a new beginning. Amazing things that Kepler has found. It has shown us these terrestrial worlds, and we still have all this work to do, to really understand how common Earths are in the galaxy. Yes, I know, they are very common. I heard something to the effect of there could be as many as 5 billion Earths in the Milky Way galaxy. That's a pretty impressive number. Saturn's Death Star moon might be hiding in an underground ocean. During a mission to discover whether or not Saturn's moon Mimas was geologically dead, researchers discovered something far more surprising. It's not like we haven't heard that a million times before. Compelling evidence of an underground ocean buried beneath the surface of the Death Star-like moon, Mimas. The researchers say it might be a stealth ocean world, a finding that, if verified, would further expand the number of potentially habitable places in our solar system. Icy moons with evidence of subsurface oceans have gathered a lot of attention from scientists lately. The two best-known examples in our solar system are Saturn's Enceladus and Jupiter's Europa. Don't forget Ganymede. It's the only moon with a magnetosphere. Are considered prime places to search for alien life. Enceladus, in particular, appears to have most of the ingredients needed to sustain life and its seawater, which spews out geysers near the moon's south pole. Now, what do you suppose it's going on that causes that? It has to be an electrical event. But while the surfaces of both Europa and Enceladus show signs of geologic activity, suggesting an internal heat source that allows liquid water to exist. Current. The surface of Mimas is heavily cratered from thunderbolts, leading Southwest Research Institute scientist Elisa Roden to suspect it was just a frozen block of ice. However, Roden now thinks Mimas' cratered-like appearance kept an ocean hidden in research published earlier this month in the journal Icarus. Roden and her colleague Matthew Walker of the Planetary Science Institute in Tucson, Arizona, show that tiny wobbles or librations in the moon's orbit detected by NASA's Cassini spacecraft can be explained by gravitational interactions with Saturn that produce enough heat to maintain a liquid ocean beneath a thick, icy shell. A model developed by the team suggested that icy shell is 14 to 20 miles thick. Findings suggest Mimas is a compelling target to further investigation. Roden said in a release, studying the moon's potential to support an ocean could help researchers understand the prevalence of ocean moons in even more distant and poorly explored locales like Uranus. like Uranus. You know, I hate to be a negative. Well, here's one we might find interesting. Our friend Ganymede is in the news. NASA spacecraft records eerie sound emitting from Jupiter's moon Ganymede. And this was posted on December 21st, so not that long ago. NASA released a 50-second audio recording from the data obtained during Juno's last flyby near Ganymede. It is the largest moon in the solar system, as we all know. One of the most important research targets for astronomers that they never tell us anything about. During the last rendezvous, Juno approached the satellite at a record 1,038 kilometers, while moving at a speed of 67,000 kilometers per hour. The spacecraft recorded the radiation from the satellite in the radio range. What makes Ganymede so special? Well, it could have been our first home, but other than that, Ganymede is of particular interest to scientists. The large moon is even larger than Mercury, has a core and a mantle. Scientists believe that there is a massive liquid ocean hidden under a layer of ice below the surface, which makes it the most promising target for the search for alien life in the solar system. I mean, they've only known about it for 30 years, and they never show us anything from the surface of Ganymede. I just find that suspicious. Also, Ganymede has its own magnetic field, which we all should know, which no other satellite in the solar system has anymore. Are magnetospheres fading remnants? If so, what's going to happen when we lose ours? It is weakening. You think that they would tell us? Juno made its recent flight on June 7th, approaching Ganymede for the first time since the Galileo flyby in 2000. The probe flew over the surface of the moon at an altitude of 1,038 kilometers at an average speed of 67 kilometers per hour. 67,000, that is. In the process, it measured electrical and magnetic waves in Ganymede's magnetosphere, which in turn is submerged in Jupiter's magnetosphere. It took incredible rare images and recorded the radiation from the satellite in the radio range. As a result, NASA scientists shifted their vibrations to convert them into an audio track. Near the sounds of Ganymede. Hear the sounds of Ganymede. It sounds a lot like Saturn. I've heard it. It's just higher pitched. Data is translated into audio frequencies for more than pure entertainment. In this way, small details can be brought to the light that might have otherwise been overlooked. Scientists have previously recorded the sounds of the solar system during planetary missions and using probes such as Voyager. Mission Chief Scott Bolton noted that a sharp increase in frequency can be heard around the middle of the recording, a sign at that moment the station moved to another region of the satellite's magnetosphere. The station, huh? I wonder what he means by that. Let's hear it. And there you have it, the sounds of Ganymede. Besides Ganymede's sounds, what's new on Jupiter? Of course, the main focus of Juno's mission has been Jupiter, and the discoveries in this line of work never cease to amaze. The most recent data indicates that over the past 5 years, the magnetic field of Jupiter has changed greatly. The Great Blue Spot equatorial magnetic anomaly is moving eastward at a speed of 4 centimeters per second, relative to the rest of the planet's inner surface. Still in turmoil. It can be assumed that the Great Blue Spot will complete a revolution in 350 years. And scientists also received a new photo of Jupiter's main dust ring. It consists of particles released by the satellites of the planet Metis and Adreus, satellites of the planets Metis and Adrustria. Metis and Adrustria. Juno photographed the ring from the inside against the background of the stars, capturing part of the constellation Perseus through the lens. It is surprising that even at this distance, the constellations look exactly the same as from any point on Earth. Well, but the twilight zone.
Gamer Dude said, "I'm off for the night. Have a good night, fellas."
Maybe it's all a prop. The latest extension of the mission, Juno, reached Jupiter's orbit on July 4, 2016. It will stay in the planet's orbit for several more years and will continue to transmit new images and data. The mission was extended for a second time earlier this year, and we honestly expect that we will see another extension in 2025 unless any of the instruments...
Gamer Dude said c.tenor.com.
And them rings, they just get clear, the surface of Jupiter just gets clearer and clearer. Look at that. I mean, it's like you can see clouds, and it's just that the atmosphere is so thick. One of the Thunderbolts guys, I think it was Andy Hall, brought up a really good observation when he said that a lot of the land masses on the Earth, match what Jupiter looks like in certain places. I think that's pretty interesting. These look like really high altitude clouds. A new image from Genocam. 2 enormous rotating storms on Jupiter. Yeah. Jeez. I wonder what the wind is, And that's it. That's the article. That was pretty interesting. NASA spacecraft detects radio emissions from Jupiter's moon, Io. The Hubble space water vapor from Jupiter's moon, well, that looks like another one about Ganymede. Let's take a look at it. Since we're on Ganymede, we might as well see what all the hubbub's about. It might be the same article, I don't know. Let's see. No? Yeah, mysterious Ganymede. They keep it hidden from us. I'm convinced of it. Hubble spies water vapor from Jupiter's moon. These results are important for the future JUICE interplanetary station, which is due to arrive in the Jupiter system in 2029. And this comes right on the heels of a video that I am nearing completion with Ramon called Conquering the Solar System Part 2. It's all hypothetical, but he puts together a pretty good plan. The Hubble Space Telescope has confirmed the presence of water vapor in the rarefied atmosphere of Jupiter's moon Ganymede. It is believed to originate from water ice. Yeah, the same kind that's on Earth, which sublimates under the influence of solar radiation and particle fluxes. The first evidence of water vapor on Ganymede. 1. Ganymede is the largest satellite in the solar system. They'll say that 3 or 4 times. Twice as heavy as the moons and larger than Mercury. Scientists' interest in it increased after it became clear that it can have a subsurface ocean, exhibit tectonic activity, and has a magnetosphere generated by liquid core, says they. 2. Another curious property of Ganymede was its tenacious atmosphere, which is formed as a result of the erosion of the ice surface of the satellite under the influence of bombardment by charged particles and solar radiation. I always remember Wall said they need a different theory for every planet. 3. It is believed to be composed of water vapor, molecular and atomic oxygen, an OH radical, and atomic and molecular hydrogen. The abundance of molecular oxygen and atomic hydrogen in the atmosphere of Ganymede was confirmed, but astronomers could not find water vapor for a long time. NASA finds evidence of 10 new Earth-sized planets in our corner of the galaxy. The more we look, the more we find planets as small as ours. NASA has found new evidence of 219
Arguments from authority are worthless. Whatever is inconsistent with facts must be discarded or revised. We must understand the cosmos as it is, and not to confuse how it is with how we wish it to be. The obvious is sometimes false, the unexpected sometimes true. Carl Sagan, Cosmos, Episode 13, Who Speaks for Earth. If Velikovsky's celestial hypothesis is correct, it must not only correlate with historical evidence, but must also correlate with and be corroborated by scientific evidence. His thesis requires that there should exist unambiguous scientific evidence that celestial mechanics accepted by all scientists as being perfect as possible is in error. If that can be proved to be the case, that cosmological theory for the stability of the solar system and the evolution of the universe, birth and evolution of galaxies, as well as stars, must also be in error. The need for such a book that gathers the evidence for celestial mechanics, the cosmology of the universe, and especially the evolution of the solar system in recent times that Velikovsky presented is long overdue. Although I intend to present a great deal of new evidence regarding these matters, it is unavoidable that I will have to present materials already published in order to elucidate the problems. Possible solutions that faced Velikovsky, unstable solar system hypothesis, and possible solutions that face Velikovsky's unstable solar system hypothesis. In this respect, one must not only deal with the question of planetary orbital changes, but also of these changes in terms of their chronology and recent history into which these chaotic motions must be proved to fit. Hence, much of this book will examine not only the evidence for the very recent unstable orbits of Mars and Venus, but it must examine the chronological scientific evidence that conforms with Velikovsky's timescale as well. Both the evidence for the solar system instability and for the return to stability for the chronological framework that Velikovsky presented must agree if his theory is valid. More than that, these varied forms of scientific evidence must contradict the scientific establishment's hypothesis on the very same points. Much of this book will therefore deal with various forms of scientific evidence that contradicts the chronology of a stable solar system over, say, 20 million years. For those who have read Pillars of the Past, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4, will remember I employed several forms of scientific evidence to analyze the chronology of the ancient world. In this respect, my approach to the established astronomical chronology of the solar system, like that of the ancient historical established chronology, will be based on presenting a great number of different forms of interdisciplinary scientific evidence that correlate and corroborate one another, but are also fully congruent with Velikovsky's hypothesis,
Rick, are you guys out there?
and are clearly contradictory to, or highly problematic for, the thesis that the solar system has been stable in recent times. In the next part of this book, Velikovsky's concept of the important role electromagnetism plays in celestial mechanics will be examined, as well as its application to solar system stability, and also to cosmology. Thus, in a sense, this volume is a continuation of my book, The Electrogravitic Theory of Celestial Motion and Cosmology. As we will see in the next chapters, the astrophysicists, astronomers, and cosmologists have literally outdone Aristotle and the Greek astronomers, inventions of epicycles, by creating new forms of matter, new celestial mechanical forces, and even new dimensions of space. It has actually reached the point where many scientists are now saying the entire cosmological edifice upheld by these new forms of matter, energy, multiple dimensions, is a colossally false rendering of celestial reality. What has always been the problem for Velikovsky and his followers is the important role mathematics has played in all this. Up until now, we have assumed that Newtonian Einsteinian theory is as perfect as can be and perfectly reflects the forces governing the motions of celestial bodies. It will be shown that mathematics has played with a leading part in driving the entire scientific community regarding these matters of celestial mechanics blindly into error. This will be examined toward the end of the book, that too great a reliance and belief in the absolute validity only of mathematics to explain the universe is not just a modern cosmological blunder, but a repetition of these same blunders of the ancient past, like the Aristotelian geocentric theory. Between what has been assumed to be objective scientific truth, The method and human psychology and sociology interrelate, and as these were understood by Velikovsky and others, it must be noted that those who attempt to criticize this book but ignore, or who have failed to read the electromagnetic theory of celestial motion and cosmology, are not dealing honestly with the materials presented here. The celestial mechanics presented in the earlier work will be greatly enlarged in this. Therefore, failure to understand that earlier evidence or deal with it as it relates to the foregoing evidence means that the critic is either ignorant of what scholarship requires or is determined to discredit this book's evidence without knowing it or even allowing their readers to know it. What I conceive to be Velikovsky's greatest problem and misfortune is that his ideas are so far ahead of his time that he had to be pilloried because the great paradigms and scientists whose concepts he challenged were false idols of his age, and it was inconceivable to the scientists, academics, and mass media that their idols could be wrong. Newton, Einstein, and all their theories, and those that had been derived from them, were the scientific idols of the 20th century, to whom all bowed as having established the indisputable laws that govern reality. This book is addressed to dealing with these giants and their theories. Because this theory is largely derived from Velikovsky, who maintained that the planets in close contact could be cushioned by their repelling magnetic fields, I have maintained that these fields must weaken at greater distances, but are still operating in a repelling manner. Therefore, since this book is a defense of my own theory and indirectly of Velikovsky's celestial scenario, I take full responsibility for it. Velikovsky could not have known what would be developed and or derived from his recent unstable solar system theory, and cannot therefore be held responsible for what I produced. No more could Velikovsky be held responsible for the creationists that followed him. Nevertheless, this connection has been employed by Michael D. Gordon in his book, The Pseudoscience Wars, Manuel Velikovsky and the Birth of the Modern Fringe. It is a simple guilt by association critique of Velikovsky, and in no way proves anything about Velikovsky because it fails to examine Velikovsky's thesis, but only his connection with later other groups. As Tom Van Flandern tells us, the validity of an idea can be determined solely by an examination of its merits. This examination Gordon has not done, and thus his critique is shallow and beside the point. Electromagnetism and celestial motion. Robert Millikan was asked whether he knew of anyone who had ever found a way of modifying or influencing the force of gravity. Millikan is said to have replied briskly, "Of course not. Such a thing is impossible and out of the question." Robert Millikan in Paul A. Lavallette, Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, Rochester, 2008. Velikovsky challenged the concept that only gravity affected celestial motions when he wrote unambiguously, "The accepted celestial mechanics notwithstanding the many calculations that have been carried out to many decimal places or verified by celestial motions, stands only if the sun, the source of light, warmth, and other radiation, is as a whole an electrically neutral body. Fundamental principles of celestial mechanics, including the law of gravitation, must come into question if the sun possesses a charge sufficient to influence the planets in their orbits or the comets in theirs. In the Newtonian celestial mechanics, based on the theory of gravitation, electricity and magnetism play no role." He further held that gravitation as an electromagnetic phenomenon. In that citation, Len E. Rose pointed out that Velikovsky had moved away from some of these positions. It should be noted that during the last 2 decades or so of Velikovsky's life, the ideas that had been expressed in Cosmos Without Gravitation, 4 Plans of the Universe, no longer reflected Velikovsky's approach to the extent that they once did. In particular, he backed off considerably from the idea of circumduction as a non-gravitational, non-inertial account, sufficient in itself to explain orbital motions. He also backed off from any general suggestions that gravity and inertia might somehow be banned from the celestial arena. He took such a pounding over it. What he often said in his later years was, not that gravity and inertia played no role, but rather that they did not play the only role. That is, that gravity and inertia were not alone responsible for what occurred in the celestial arena. Electromagnetic interactions also played a considerable role in cosmic events, especially when celestial bodies were in close approach to each other, but also even when they were far apart. In any case, each of the 4 plans of the universe, even the 4th, should be taken as a construction, a working hypothesis, for the purposes of discussion. Not as a final position. The same is true of cosmos without gravitation. Not all of the ideas that were formulated in that early monograph were ones that Velikovsky continued to adhere to in his later work. Nevertheless, it must be emphasized that Velikovsky did not ever abandon the idea that gravity itself might eventually be interpreted as an electromagnetic phenomenon. Nor did he ever abandon the idea that the solar magnetic field might, to some extent, be responsible for the fact that the planetary orbits are roughly coplanar. This, then, is the general concept that Velikovsky believes celestial mechanics rested upon. Nevertheless, before proceeding, it must be pointed out that Robert J. Shadwald, on the advice of one of Velikovsky's disgruntled followers, brought up Cosmos Without Collision and cited it without ever letting his readers know that Velikovsky no longer agreed with much of that material, but clearly and anger-driven claimed these were still Velikovsky's positions. Nevertheless, Velikovsky's electromagnetic concept is now out in the scientific community, and as we will see, it is growing. As was also pointed out above in the chapter on celestial mechanics, there are several aspects of celestial mechanics that cannot be correlated mathematically without Newtonian theory, but require an additional force, electromagnetic force, in order to operate. Miles Mathis, who well understood the depths of maniacal rage this Velikovskyan concept held for
Ashcroft 6019 said close the tab and disconnected. Need.
Who would have to admit that Velikovsky was at least partially right, would rather tear out their eyeballs and eat them than go there. In terms of Freudian psychology, the great underlying neurotic problem of humanity is the Oedipal complex, as outlined by the Greek playwright Sophocles in his trilogy Oedipus. Oedipus, unable to deal with the fact that he had violated every moral aspect in his life, when discovering that he had actually done so, gouged out his eyeballs, unable to face his behavior. So too the scientists of this generation, according to Mathis, rather than admit Velikovsky was at least partially right, would rather tear out their eyeballs. Velikovsky was related. I'm just picturing that. Velikovsky has related a story he liked to tell. Once in the twilight hour, a visitor came to my study, a distinguished-looking gentleman. He brought me a manuscript dealing with celestial mechanics. After a glance at some of the pages, I had the feeling that this was the work of a mathematical genius. I entered into a conversation with my visitor and mentioned the name of James Clerk Maxwell. My guest asked, "Who is he?" Embarrassed, I answered, "You know, the scientist who gave a theoretical explanation of the experiments of Faraday?" "And who is Faraday?" inquired the stranger. In growing embarrassment, I said, "Of course, the man who did pioneer work in electromagnetism." "And what is electromagnetism?" asked the gentleman. "What is your name?" I inquired. He answered, "Isaac Newton." When Velikovsky awoke, on his knees was an open volume of Newton's Principia. This story is told to illustrate what I have said before. Would you listen to anybody discuss the mechanics of the spheres who does not know the elementary physical forces existing in nature? But this is the position adopted by astronomers who acclaim as infallible a celestial mechanics conceived in the 1660s, in which electricity and magnetism play not the slightest role. Let us first examine the reaction of the astronomers to evidence that electromagnetism plays in celestial mechanics, before looking at the experimental evidence related to it. This brings us the first part of the Velikovsky affair, when critics of Velikovsky's concept that electromagnetism plays a crucial role in celestial mechanics was debated and forcefully denied. What we will see is that in each and every instance, when a critic leveled a charge against Velikovsky's electromagnetic concept, and it was shown to be an error, and further the evidence instead supported Velikovsky, the critic never faced up to that counter-evidence. and acted as if the counter-evidence never existed by retreating into a state of silence and denial. Let us now look at these early critics and the evidence. The first critic was Donald Menzel, director of Harvard College Observatory, as explained by Ralph E. Jurgens. In 1952, in the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, Menzel had offered calculations to show that if Velikovsky were right about the electromagnetic forces in the solar system, the Sun would have a surface electric potential of 10 to the 19th, 10 billion volts. An absolute impossibility, according to the astronomers. But in 1960, V.A. Bailey, emeritus professor of physics at the University of Sydney, claimed that the Sun is electrically charged and that it had a surface potential of 10 to the 19 volts. Precisely the value calculated by Menzel. Bailey, at the time his theory was first published, was entirely unaware of Velikovsky's work and of Menzel's refutation of it. The idea that this quantitative refutation of Velikovsky's wild hypothesis, Menzel's own description of his contribution to the proceedings in 1952, should now be brought to Velikovsky's support, was intolerable to the Harvard astronomer. So when he mailed his paper to Harper's in 1963, he also sent a copy to Bailey in Sydney and asked him in a covering letter to revoke his theory of electric charge of the Sun. The theory was casting doubt on the continuing efforts of Menzel and other American scientists to discredit Velikovsky, and Menzel pointed out of what he conceived to be an error in Bailey's work. The mathematical error, to the contrary, had been made by Menzel. Nevertheless, when new scientific evidence supported Velikovsky's concept regarding electromagnetism, neither Menzel nor the rest of the astronomical physics establishment jumped at the opportunity of evaluating how it might operate, but instead tried to deny the evidence existed. Einstein agreed with Velikovsky, who said, "The real cause of indignation against my theory of global catastrophes is the implication that celestial bodies may be charged." He, Einstein, wrote in the margin, yes, just like the scholastic professors denied that Galileo's telescope showed Jupiter had 4 moons circling it. The entire scientific establishment denied that the Sun may very well carry a charge capable of affecting the orbits of the planets. There was no investigation, only flat-out denial. Electromagnetism